But he was a powerful, powerful man. But he was more interested in his books than he was in the affairs of state. And there are those who said he spent too much time in his books and not enough on his affairs of state. And there were some who were disturbed that the books on which he spent the most time were books of magic. He spent so much time reading his books of magic that after a time he began to realize he had best find someone else to take over the affairs of state for him, or they'd be utterly neglected, and that wouldn't be right. So he chose my Uncle Antonio. And he gave Antonio control over all of the affairs of state, and Antonio, I suppose, was better suited to that than my father was. He trusted his brother. He believed in his brother. He would have trusted his brother with his life. And that was his mistake. Because when I was 2 years old, my Uncle Antonio decided that rather than helping his brother, the Duke of Milan, he would rather be the Duke of Milan. And so he went to the King of Venice, King Alonso, and said, "Venice and Milan have never had anything to do with one another, but if you will raise an army on my behalf, if you will help me unseat my brother, if you will make me the Duke of Milan, then we will pay tribute to you, the King of Venice." And Alonso was easily swayed. And so he and my uncle raised an army, a mighty army, that came with swords clashing and horses running, and from what I'm told, we barely escaped with our lives. It was good old Lord Gonzalo who saved us. He found a ship. Wasn't much of a ship, leaky old vessel, but it was something. And he fitted it out enough that we might be able to sail for a time, and if we were lucky, we'd hit land. He put in enough food for us, and he even put in my father's magic books, and linen, and silver, so that when we landed wherever we landed, my father could still live the sort of life a duke was supposed to live. And there we were, cast adrift. I said to my father, "What a burden I must have been to you. A 2-year-old baby at a time like that." He said, "No, it was your smiles, Miranda, that kept me going." Well, we landed on an island. It was deserted. There was no one there. Well, Caliban, but he was only half human. His mother was a witch. She'd been banished to the island. She was heavy with child at the time, a child that was wrought by the devil himself. So Caliban was only half human, couldn't even speak when we arrived. But my father treated him kindly. Caliban showed us where the food was, showed us which berries we could eat and which we couldn't, and where to fish. And my father taught him our language. And as I got older, I too played with him and taught him words for thoughts that had never had words before. My only other companion was Ariel. Ariel was a spirit who'd been trapped in a pine tree by Caliban's mother, the witch. I don't know if she'd intended to trap him there for all time or if she trapped him and then died, but she was dead before we arrived on the island, and my father found Ariel, poor Ariel, trapped in the pine tree. And my father knew just enough magic to be able to free him. So he freed Ariel, and both Ariel and Caliban served my father. Caliban was evil. Tried to have his way with me. My father prevented it and turned him from servant to slave. But Ariel someday would be freed, that I knew. And oh, the times we had romping about that beautiful island. So lush, so green, so many places to hide and play. 12 years later, when I was 14, there was a storm, the likes of which I had never seen before. The most terrifying storm you can imagine. There was off the coast of the island, it was not so far away that, well, you couldn't quite make out the coast at Milan, but almost. And the ships we could see coming from a distance up from Africa. When the storm hit with such intensity, it was black, swirling black all around the ships, and they were blown off course, closer and closer and closer to our island, until I could hear the screams of the men on board. I could hear their shouts and their groans as they realized they could not save the ship. And then I heard words. His Majesty, the Duke, the King, words floating through the air from that ship. And as I watched, it seemed the storm concentrated itself over one of the ships in that fleet in particular, until it crushed it utterly. And I watched as that ship sank and heard the screams of those men. The rest of the fleet sailed on. There was nothing they could do. I said to my father, that was the most horrible thing I've ever seen. I wish I could get those sounds out of my head. Hearing those men scream, it tore my heart apart. And my father said, Miranda, don't worry. Everyone's fine. How could they be fine? You know they couldn't. You saw with your own eyes. You heard with your own ears. He said, no, Miranda. I never told you before how we came to be on this island. That is when he told me about his brother, how my Uncle Antonio had taken his title away. And that's when he told me that was no natural storm, which then seemed so obvious to me, the way it had centered itself on one ship and one ship only. No, it was no natural storm. That was Ariel. Ariel, the shapeshifter, who had caused that great storm, who had been the lightning flashing at one end of the boat to the other, to the middle, to the back, one end to the other. It was Ariel all along. And then it was Ariel who saw to it that no one actually drowned. Though they were cast into the water, he safely escorted them to different parts of the island at my father's behest. The sailors in one place, the royal passengers, for it was King Alonso and his son, Ferdinand, and his brother Sebastian, who was as evil as my uncle Antonio, the Duke of Milan, who was also on board that ship. And good old Lord Gonzalo was there as well. Well, they were in one part of the island, you see, the sailors in another part, and Ferdinand, the prince, was separated from all of them. When Ferdinand walked into the clearing, I had never seen something so beautiful in my entire life. I thought, I've only seen two men, my father and Caliban, who's only half man, but there can be no man more beautiful than this man walking into the clearing just now. He must be a god. No, my father said, he is no god, he is only a man. But I was instantly taken with him, and he with me. Come to find out, that was part of my father's plan all along. But he didn't want me to know that right away. And so he told Ferdinand he did not believe that his love for me was real, and made him work. This prince, who had never done manual labor, this prince he forced to carry our firewood for hours upon hours. And do you know, I said to him, I'm so sorry you're having to do this. And all on my account, he said, it's nothing. I would carry wood for the rest of my life just for you. Can you imagine? Finally, my father did consent to let us marry. It must have been 4 hours of carrying firewood at least. In the meantime, however, on the other side of the island, of course we didn't know this was happening at all, but Ariel had gone first to bring sleep upon the king, Lord Gonzalvo. But not the Duke, my uncle, and not the Prince Sebastian. And as soon as the king was asleep brought on by the grief of believing that his only son had gone to the bottom of the ocean, that he would never see him again, that he lay dead in the mud below. In his grief, the king slept. And my uncle tried to do it again. That's when my uncle said to Prince Sebastian, "Your brother's asleep. The prince is dead. The only thing that stands between you and the crown is your brother. Kill him. Kill him." I did it to my brother. It's the best thing I ever did. Look at me, I'm the Duke of Milan. I would do it again 1,000 times, and I will help you do it to your brother. Imagine what we could do together. Let us kill King Alonso. Let's do it. And Sebastian, with no mind of his own, after a few feeble protests, also drew his sword. They were approaching the sleeping king, each one of them with swords drawn, King Alonso lying defenseless at their feet. And rearing back, ready to strike, suddenly Ariel woke Lord Gonzalvo, who, seeing them with swords drawn, cried out, "Save the king!" Oh, that's exactly what we were doing," said my uncle and Sebastian. "That's exactly what, there was a bear, no, a lion, yes, no, there was something, we heard a sound, that's all, we were defending the king." But the king saw their faces and knew otherwise. And then Ariel did the most amazing thing. He provided for all of them a beautiful feast. Had a table laid out, and nymphs and sprites dancing about, laying out the food and gesturing for them to come and feast themselves. And as the four of them approached the table, suddenly the table was gone. "You will have no feast," said a voice. They could not see Ariel. "You will have no feast. You don't deserve a feast. You are murderers. Murderers, all of you. How dare you think you would be able to partake of a table such as this after what you have done? No. And you, King Alonso, you in particular, you should die as your son has, lay in the mud with him at the bottom of the ocean." The king was overcome, not knowing where this voice was coming from, but suddenly struck to the quick, realizing that he had killed the Duke of Milan, or so he thought. That if he had not helped my uncle to dethrone his brother, it never would have happened. He was as guilty as my Uncle Antonio. And poor King Alonso then mourned, thinking, "It's no wonder my son Ferdinand was taken from me. It is in punishment for what I did." After they had suffered long enough, my father asked Ariel to bring the four to him. And when they walked into the clearing and saw my father, the former Duke, alive and well, imagine the wonder on their faces. this be? How could he have survived? But still, the king wore a long, long face. My father said, "Your Majesty, why are you so upset?" He said, "I've lost my son. Did you not see the shipwreck? My son Ferdinand lies at the bottom of the ocean." My father said, "I too lost a daughter. I lost a child to that storm." "How can that be?" asked the king. At which point my father walked to the side and drew back a curtain behind which Ferdinand and I were busily playing chess. My father had the opportunity to wreak whatever vengeance he wanted to on his brother, on the king's good-for-nothing brother. But he chose mercy. When the king saw what he had done, he begged my father's forgiveness. Lord Gonzalo, of course, never had anything to beg for. He hadn't saved us. My father outwitted the king. My father's title was taken from him by violence. But I married Prince Ferdinand. My father's grandson will be the King of Venice. I've been married to Ferdinand now for 30 years. That seems like a very long time ago. But he's still as romantic as he ever was. And he told me last night that he has a special visitor coming to the palace tomorrow. Someone that he wants me to talk to. It's a playwright, someone, William something. And he wants me to tell him all about the Tempest.